Every story of awakening begins with a wound. Not a poetic one, but a real aching tear in the fabric of your life. Something breaks, a loss, a betrayal, a silence too heavy to bear. And through that crack, the light of consciousness begins to seep in. It doesn't feel like enlightenment. It feels like devastation. You look at your life and realize that what once made sense no longer does. The world you built starts to tremble. The self you believed in begins to dissolve. You try to fix it, to go back to the old rhythm, but the music is gone. That's the moment when Jung would say, the psyche has spoken. The ancient Greeks had a myth for this. They called him Chiron, the wise centaur, teacher of heroes, the one who carried a wound that would never heal. Pierced by a poisoned arrow, he could heal everyone except himself. And yet, from his suffering came wisdom so deep it shaped the legends of gods and men. Jung saw in Chiron the image of every human being who has ever suffered deeply. The wounded healer. He wrote, "Only the wounded physician heals." Because it is only the one who has known pain who can truly sit with the pain of another without trying to escape it. We tend to think healing means eliminating pain. But in Jung's world, healing meant transforming our relationship to it. The wound isn't the enemy, it's the doorway. It tears through illusion, revealing what lies beneath the surface, the forgotten, the repressed, the unloved. Think of the moments that shaped you most. Were they not the ones that hurt? The betrayals that stripped your innocence, the losses that shattered your certainty, the failures that humbled your pride. Those are the places where the ego dies and the soul begins to breathe. Jung wrote that the wound is the place where the light enters. But light doesn't come gently. It burns. It exposes what we tried to hide. And in that exposure, we discover something paradoxical. The pain that feels like death is actually the beginning of life. You don't choose the wound, it chooses you. And at first it feels unfair, as if the universe singled you out for cruelty. But if you stay with it long enough, you begin to see a pattern. The same themes repeat in your life. The same kinds of people, conflicts, emotions. That's not bad luck. That's the psyche insisting on being seen. Every wound is a message from the unconscious saying, "Look here." And if you ignore it, it speaks louder. Through anxiety, addiction, exhaustion, disease. The body becomes the last language of the soul. Jung said, "The gods have become diseases." The ancient energies we once honored as divine now live in our symptoms, waiting to be recognized again. Pain then is not punishment. It's communication. The wound says something essential in you has been forgotten. But in our modern world, we don't listen. We medicate the message, numb the ache, scroll through distraction. We treat pain as failure, as something to fix instead of something to understand. And yet, every time we silence the wound, we silence the teacher within it. Chiron never escaped his suffering. He transcended it by giving it meaning. His wound became his wisdom. He turned what was unbearable into service. That is the path of the wounded healer. To let your suffering make you more human, not more bitter. Maybe your wound isn't ancient or mythic. Maybe it's something small. The quiet heartbreak no one else sees. The loss you never grieved. The voice you silenced to survive. But even small wounds carry cosmic weight. They are the way the soul keeps your story honest. And so the invitation is this: stop running from what hurts. Turn toward it. Ask it what it wants to teach you. Because one day you'll see, the wound that broke you was never punishment. It was the soul calling your name for the first time. The first instinct of the wounded soul is escape. We don't wake up enlightened. We wake up terrified. When pain arrives, it feels like invasion, like a violation of the order we built around ourselves. The wound opens and our reflex is to close it fast. To cover, medicate, explain, distract. To convince ourselves that if we just keep moving, it might disappear. But pain has patience. It doesn't leave because you ignore it. It waits until you're quiet again. Jung saw this avoidance as the ego's greatest illusion, the belief that suffering can be managed without transformation. People will do anything, he wrote, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And he was right. Look around. We live in an era of elegant avoidance. Constant noise, endless goals, curated happiness. Everything designed to keep us from sitting still long enough to feel. We are a civilization addicted to anesthesia. We fear silence because it reminds us of everything unresolved within it. So we drown it in stimulation. The pain, denied expression, becomes restless. It moves underground. It slips into our language, our habits, our relationships. You can always tell when someone is running from pain. They move too fast. They need constant validation, constant meaning, constant distraction. Because if they stopped, even for a moment, the truth would catch up, and truth doesn't whisper. It roars. The modern mind has mastered the art of substitution. Pills instead of presence, pleasure instead of peace, performance instead of purpose. We mistake numbing for healing. But what we call healing without awareness is only repression with better branding. Jung said that repression is like a dam built in the psyche. The water behind it, the repressed emotions, traumas, truths, doesn't vanish. It accumulates pressure until it finds another outlet. Depression, anger, compulsions, physical illness. The energy of what we deny must go somewhere. The more we resist pain, the more power it gains. We've been taught to fear breakdowns, but Jung saw them as breakthroughs in disguise. There is no coming to consciousness without pain, he wrote. People will do anything to avoid their souls, yet it is their own soul that heals them. That's the paradox. We flee from the very thing that wants to heal us. Pain isn't chaos, it's communication. It arrives when the soul has been ignored for too long. Each symptom, each ache, each sleepless night is a message. The question is not, how do I make this stop? But what is this trying to say? But listening takes courage, and courage demands stillness. And stillness is the one thing the modern world cannot stand. We fear pain because we think it will destroy us. But what if pain's purpose is not destruction, but revelation? The wound opens precisely where the light needs to enter. Jung compared the unconscious to nature, not moral, not polite, but wise. Its storms come to cleanse, its fires to renew. When you deny your pain, you deny your transformation. You stay trapped in half-life, efficient, functional, emotionally absent. You become the persona Jung described, a mask built for survival, polished enough to hide the truth from others, but never from yourself. Denial may protect you from feeling, but it also protects you from healing. There's a reason myths and religions across time begin with suffering. Prometheus chained, Christ crucified, the Buddha leaving his palace. They all understood that pain is the initiation of the soul. To refuse pain is to refuse initiation. To remain a child in a world that demands maturity. And so the wound waits. It waits until the right silence, the right moment, the right breakdown. Because eventually, life forces honesty upon us. The job, Jung would say, is not to seek suffering, but to stop resisting it. When you stop running, pain loses its fangs. It turns its face, and you realize it was never the enemy. It was the messenger. And if you listen closely beneath the ache, there's always a whisper. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to return you to yourself. Every true healing begins with descent. It doesn't start with light or hope or meaning. It starts with the fall. You stop running and gravity takes over. You sink into the ache you've avoided for years. The mind protests, the body trembles, the ego panics. But something deeper, quieter, older knows. This is the way home. Jung called this the night sea journey, the stage where consciousness is pulled beneath the surface into the depths of the unconscious. In myth, this is when Orpheus enters the underworld, when Inanna descends into the dark womb of the earth, when Christ is buried before resurrection. Every transformation demands that something die. The descent is not punishment, it's initiation. Pain is the gatekeeper, and the key is surrender. When you stop resisting, the wound begins to speak. At first, it speaks in tears, then in dreams, then in symbols. Jung discovered that the unconscious communicates through image and emotion, not through logic, but through vision. The descent is when those visions begin to rise. Shadows, fears, forgotten memories. Not to haunt you, but to show you what still lives in the dark. This is the moment when people often think they're breaking down. In truth, they're breaking open. The collapse of the old self feels like death because it is. The death of the persona, the false structures we built to survive. But beneath the ruins, something timeless waits. The self, the living center of the psyche. In the Red Book, Jung described this descent vividly. After his split from Freud, he was seized by visions and dreams that terrified him. He thought he was losing his mind, but instead of fleeing, he followed them, writing, painting, dialoguing with his inner figures. I had to let myself be carried along by whatever the current of the unconscious produced, he wrote. That surrender gave birth to his greatest insights. He learned that the psyche heals itself through dialogue, that what we fear in the dark are simply the parts of us longing to be seen. Every demon, he said, was once an angel denied. Every shadow is a part of the soul cast out by shame. As you descend, you begin to meet them. The memories, the regrets, the desires you buried. They appear not as enemies, but as exiles. And something strange happens. The more you allow them space, the less power they have over you. The monsters of the unconscious shrink under the light of awareness. What was once chaos becomes conversation. But this descent is not easy. It demands honesty, brutal, tender honesty. You have to admit what you've done and what's been done to you. You have to let go of the idea that you were ever in control. Jung called this the sacrifice of the hero. The ego must kneel before the greater life of the soul. It's in this surrender that the transformation begins. You start to see patterns, how your pain connects to your choices, your relationships, your reactions. You realize that what you blamed on the world was often your own shadow at work. And instead of shame, a quiet compassion appears. You start forgiving yourself, not because you were right, but because you finally understand. The descent strips everything away, your roles, your defenses, your illusions, until only essence remains. It's terrifying, but also liberating. You see that the darkness you feared is not empty, it's full of meaning. The underworld is not hell, it's the womb of renewal. There's a passage in Jung's writings where he says, "In the deepest abyss I found grace." That's the paradox of the descent. When you stop fighting the darkness, you discover that it's been holding you all along. Pain, once seen as enemy, becomes guide. Suffering, once meaningless, becomes medicine. And the wound, once unbearable, begins to glow faintly from within. The descent doesn't end the story, it opens it. Because now, for the first time, you're no longer at war with yourself. You've entered the sacred darkness, and the soul has begun to speak. Every descent has a turning point, a moment when darkness stops feeling like punishment and starts to feel like presence. You don't climb out of it, you wake within it. The world hasn't changed, but your perception has. You begin to see that what felt like destruction was actually disclosure, a revelation hidden in ruin. At first, you don't understand it. The pain is still there, but it carries a strange intelligence. The grief that once crushed you now seems to hold you. The wound begins to whisper in a language older than words. You start to sense meaning pulsing beneath suffering, as if your soul has been waiting to speak through it all along. Jung said, "Suffering is not in vain. It is the moment when the self is trying to become conscious. The self, that deeper organizing principle of the psyche, uses the wound to break through the surface of the ego. What feels like collapse is the soul insisting on growth. Pain becomes a signal, not of weakness, but of transformation. This is the revelation. Your wound is not your enemy, it is your teacher. It arrived with a message, to bring awareness where there was denial, compassion where there was judgment, depth where there was distraction. You realize now that pain was never against you. It was for you. A mirror showing what needed to be seen, a fire burning what could no longer remain. Every tear was a baptism, every loss a doorway. The myths always hinted at this truth. Chiron's wound never healed, yet it gave birth to healing itself. Prometheus was chained, but his suffering brought fire to humankind. Even in nature, wounds are how light enters. The crack in the seed, the break in the shell, the fissure in the earth from which water springs. Life itself evolves through fracture. Jung wrote that every neurosis hides a secret, a suffering that has not yet found its meaning. When that meaning emerges, the neurosis dissolves. The psyche isn't trying to punish us, it's trying to teach us. Pain is the psyche's last attempt to make us whole. But meaning doesn't appear as explanation, it appears as symbol. You might dream of water after years of drought, or of an animal that watches you from the dark. The image feels alive, charged with emotion. That's the unconscious revealing the medicine of the wound. The symbol doesn't solve the pain, it transforms your relationship to it. And that's enough to begin healing. Healing, Jung reminded us, is not about erasing pain, it's about integrating it. Wholeness, he said, is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. The wound becomes sacred because it unites opposites, strength and vulnerability, darkness and light, ego and soul. You begin to see that empathy is born exactly here, in the shared human wound. When you've touched your own depths, you stop judging others for theirs. You recognize the same ache behind different faces. The revelation turns inward and outward at once. Your pain connects you to every other being that has ever suffered. That's the mystery Jung called the transcendent function, the alchemy that happens when opposites meet. Pain and purpose, despair and hope, mortality and divinity, all fuse in the fire of awareness. The wound becomes the bridge between the human and the sacred, and something extraordinary happens. Gratitude appears. Not the naive gratitude that pretends everything is fine, but the mature gratitude that sees the pattern in the pain. You realize the wound didn't come to ruin your life. It came to reveal your soul. Now the darkness that once felt infinite begins to glow from within. The same depth that terrified you becomes the source of compassion. You see the faces of others, strangers, friends, enemies, and something in you recognizes them. You've been where they are. You've known their pain. That's how healers are born. Not from perfection, but from participation. The revelation of the wound is that it makes you human enough to love. Chiron's immortality was his torment until he offered his suffering as sacrifice. And only then was he freed. He discovered that what cannot be cured must be carried consciously. That's what this stage teaches. You may never be free from your wound, but you can be free through it. And that's not a burden, it's grace in disguise. When pain finds meaning, it turns into gold. That is the secret at the heart of every ancient alchemy. Not the transformation of metal, but of soul. Jung understood this deeply. He saw in the alchemist's furnace a metaphor for the psyche. The heat of suffering purifies what is impure, burns away illusion, and reveals the essence hidden within. He wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That is the alchemical process, not escaping darkness, but transmuting it. Once you've seen your wound as teacher, you begin to sense that the energy trapped inside it, the grief, the rage, the shame, is not poison, but potential. Every emotion you once feared becomes raw material for creation. What was destructive becomes transformative. The very thing that broke you becomes the fire that shapes your soul. The world calls it resilience. Jung would call it individuation, the soul integrating what the ego rejected, turning shadow into strength. This is where the curador ferido begins to emerge. Not as a saint, not as a savior, but as someone who carries pain consciously, who knows that healing others doesn't mean fixing them, but holding space for their process as you learn to hold space for your own. You realize now that your compassion was born in the same soil as your suffering. You understand pain not intellectually but viscerally. You've walked through the dark yourself. So when you see pain in another, you don't turn away. You recognize it. You sit beside it wordlessly because you know. Sometimes presence heals more than advice ever could. That's the essence of the wounded healer. You cannot heal others because you are perfect. You heal because you are honest. Your wound becomes a doorway through which others can see themselves. There's an image Jung loved, the alchemical vessel, the vase hermeticum. It's the sealed container where transformation happens. For him, that vessel was the human psyche, the place where opposites meet and transmute. Your life becomes that vessel. Everything you've suffered, loved, lost, feared, all of it cooks in the fire of awareness. Slowly, painfully, beautifully, something new emerges. Wisdom. Pain, when held consciously, becomes empathy. Grief becomes tenderness. Anger becomes boundary. Loneliness becomes connection. Even trauma, when understood, becomes a map, a chart of where the soul has already traveled and where it can guide others safely. That is the alchemy. The wound, once seen as curse, becomes medicine. You begin to understand that your suffering is not meaningless. It's meaning itself, asking to be lived creatively. You may express it through art, through kindness, through listening, through work that touches lives. It doesn't matter how. What matters is that the energy moves. Jung called this the transcendent function, the process that creates a bridge between opposites, allowing psychic energy to flow freely again. Creation in any form is healing, because it's the soul finding language for what was unspeakable. You no longer fear your sensitivity. You honor it. You see that your depth is not a defect. It's your gift. The wound has made you porous, open to the subtleties of existence. You can sense when others are in pain, not because you pity them, but because your own pain taught you how to feel. The great paradox is that healing never makes you invincible. It makes you human. The gold the alchemist sought was never external. It was the light born from endurance, from patience, from humility. Now, when you look back, you no longer curse the wound. You bow to it. You see that it carved you open so that life could flow through you. This is the moment when you stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, What can be created from this? That's when the suffering ends, not because the pain disappears, but because it finally has purpose. And purpose, Jung knew, is the soul's way of saying, I have survived myself. Every descent must be followed by a return. The wound has been faced, the darkness endured, the gold discovered. But the journey is not complete until the treasure is brought back into the world. Jung said that true transformation is tested not in solitude, but in relationship. It's one thing to find peace in silence, it's another to remain conscious amid the noise of life. The curador ferido returns, not as a savior, but as a witness. He doesn't preach enlightenment, he carries quietness. His eyes see differently now. The same world that once felt hostile now appears alive with meaning. He no longer asks, why is there suffering? But what is this trying to awaken in me? The healer doesn't seek followers, he seeks connection. He listens, he observes. He understands that everyone he meets is carrying some invisible wound, just as he once did. His gift is not his knowledge, but his presence. The atmosphere of peace that arises from someone who no longer fights reality. That's what healing is at its essence. The transmission of integration. Not words, not techniques, but being. In Jung's language, this is the return from the underworld, the completion of individuation. The ego, once separated from the unconscious, now serves it. The personality becomes transparent to the self. Life itself becomes the teacher. The healer returns to ordinary things, work, family, friendship, but he lives them differently. He doesn't demand that life be perfect. He doesn't run from discomfort. He has learned the rhythm of the opposites, expansion and contraction, joy and sorrow, love and loss, and he moves through them with grace. He no longer needs to fix the world because he understands that the world, like the psyche, heals through awareness. The only true medicine is consciousness. To bring consciousness into one small corner of existence is to heal that corner, and that is enough. This is what Jung meant when he said, the salvation of the world depends on the salvation of the individual soul. The healer's transformation radiates outward. He doesn't try to change others, yet others change around him. His authenticity invites authenticity. His calm awakens calm. The return is never without challenge. The healer will still feel pain, will still face loss, will still be misunderstood. But now he knows that these are not signs of failure. They are signs of being alive. The goal was never to escape humanity, but to embody it fully. When Jung spoke of the self, he described it as both deeply personal and universally connected, the God within us. The healer returns to the world aware of that divinity in all things. He sees the sacred in the mundane, in laughter, in tears, in the imperfection of existence. The wound taught him reverence. He no longer says, I am healed. He says, I am healing, because the work never ends. It deepens. Each new pain, each new challenge becomes another opportunity to practice presence. Healing becomes a way of living, not a state to achieve. The healer's greatest power is humility. He knows that he is both wounded and whole, human and divine, light and shadow, all at once. He carries his paradoxes openly, without shame. That transparency itself becomes medicine. When people are near such a soul, they feel permission to be themselves. They sense that they don't need to hide their pain, because here pain is sacred. That's how healing spreads, not by force, but by resonance. This is the return of the healer, not a dramatic victory, but a quiet homecoming. He doesn't need recognition, he needs authenticity. He doesn't seek applause, he seeks truth. He doesn't promise happiness, he embodies wholeness. He walks through the world gently, as one who has seen both heaven and hell and found them both inside himself. And wherever he walks, something subtle happens. The air feels softer, the silence feels safe, and others begin unknowingly to remember their own light. Because the healed don't heal the world by preaching, they heal it by remembering. There comes a day when you stop asking why it happened and start asking what it gave you. That's when you realize. The wound was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to sculpt you. You begin to see the subtle design beneath everything that hurt. The heartbreak that cracked you open taught you tenderness. The failure that humiliated you taught you humility. The loss that hollowed you out made you spacious enough for compassion. Every scar on your soul is a sentence in the language of meaning. Jung once said, where your fear is, there is your task. The wound shows you that fear is not an enemy. It's a compass. It points to the place where life is asking to be lived more fully. The wound is the teacher that never flatters, never lies, never leaves. It is the part of you that demands truth. The ego seeks to be impressive. The soul seeks to be real. And the wound is how the soul keeps you real. You look back now, and what once felt like punishment reveals itself as preparation. The descent, the despair, the silence, all of it was the training of empathy. You were being taught to feel the world from the inside. That's the paradox Jung discovered. The wound that isolates you also connects you. It removes illusion and builds compassion. The deeper you've suffered, the deeper you can love. Not because you're noble, but because your own pain taught you how fragile everything is. There's a humility in the wounded healer that can't be learned in books. It's the wisdom of someone who has bled and still chooses kindness. It's the grace of someone who can hold contradiction, joy and sorrow, love and loss, without needing one to cancel the other. The gift of the wound is not mastery, it's humanity. You no longer seek to rise above pain. You live alongside it gently like an old friend. It becomes a reminder that life is precious because it can break. The wound keeps you awake, tender, and true. In alchemy, this final stage is called rubedo, the reddening, the moment when the soul, tempered by fire, shines with its own light. Jung saw this as the symbol of integration, the union of opposites, the awakening of meaning. The wound glows red not from suffering, but from transmutation. You begin to live differently now. You stop trying to fix others. You no longer need to prove or perform. You start to serve in quiet ways, through listening, through honesty, through being fully present. Healing becomes your natural state, not because you're unbroken, but because you're whole. And perhaps that is the true definition of wholeness, not perfection, but participation. To be whole is to include everything. The beauty and the grief, the clarity and the confusion, the wound and the wisdom. The gift of the wound is consciousness itself. Without pain, we would remain asleep in the comfort of our illusions. It is the wound that wakes us, that forces us to feel, that drives us to seek meaning. Every time life breaks you open, it is asking the same question. Will you become bitter or will you become real? The curador. Ferido chooses reality. He accepts that he will never be untouched, but he will always be aware. He walks through the world carrying his wound not as shame but as offering, a candle lit from the fire of his own suffering. He knows that some pains never leave. But now, instead of asking for them to vanish, he asks for them to serve. And so the circle closes. The wound that once tore him apart becomes the thread that binds him to life. That is the quiet miracle of the human soul, that it can turn agony into art, despair into depth, and loss into love. The wound never stops aching, but now it aches with meaning. If you're still here, listening, breathing, feeling, then something in you already understands. The wound you carry is not your enemy. It's your initiation. Every soul that awakens walks the same path. The breaking, the descent, the revelation, the return. It is the oldest story in the world, and yet somehow it is always new when it happens to you. You've seen now what Jung saw, that the darkness is not evil, that the pain is not pointless, and that the wound, your wound, is the most honest place your soul has ever spoken from. So before you go, take a breath. Place your hand over your heart. Feel it beating, steady, imperfect, alive. That's not just your heart. That's life itself continuing its work through you. You are not broken. You are transforming. And if this journey has touched you, if you felt even for a moment that something inside became lighter, clearer, more awake, then I invite you to stay with me here. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a like. Share this with someone who carries their own wound, not as an act of promotion, but as an act of remembrance. Because each time one person understands their pain, it gives courage to another. That is how healing spreads, quietly from soul to soul, like candlelight moving through the dark. This channel is not about perfection. It's about depth, about walking with honesty through the mystery of being human. Here we speak the language of the soul, Jung's language, your language, mine. We explore the symbols, the shadows, the silences that connect us all. So stay, grow with me. There will be more journeys through love, solitude, fear, and transformation. Because the work of the soul never ends. It deepens. And as you move through the world carrying your own sacred wound, remember this. You are not less because you hurt. You are more because you feel. The light you've been looking for was never meant to erase your darkness, only to help you see by it. So take that light with you. Walk gently. And when someone else's pain reaches you, as it inevitably will, you'll know what to do. You'll recognize yourself in them. You'll remember what it means to heal. And the circle, quiet, ancient, eternal, will continue. Subscribe, like, share, and let's keep awakening together.